Good afternoon, esteemed committee. Brianna January with Chamber of Progress in respectful opposition to HB 5474. Chamber of Progress is a tech industry coalition advocating for the progressive future of tech and inclusive access to that future. Our partners include innovators like Apple and Google, but they do not have a vote or veto on our positions. One of our top priorities is making the internet safe for young people, and we share the concerns that you've heard today. However, we believe HB 5474 is not the appropriate approach and would actually disproportionately harm Connecticut's most vulnerable youth. On third-party age verification, there are very few companies that actually provide those services, and those that do so have a horrible track record regarding cybersecurity and safeguarding what is ultimately very sensitive personal data. More importantly, however, we are concerned that the bill could be weaponized by anti-LGBTQ guardians, in particular, to prevent queer kids from accessing community, resources, and safe spaces online. Committee, this could quite literally have life-threatening consequences for these youth. Studies have shown that LGBTQ youth, especially those who may live in households hostile to their identity, view social media as a crucial tool to connect with peers, access content of shared experiences, build community, and reduce isolation. And while well-intentioned, HB 5474 would in practice actually promote toxic posts over healthy content, having the direct opposite effect of what the bill intends to do. Committee, algorithms are actually very important and play a critical role in promoting safe and healthy content. Content curation allows platforms to downrank or even remove unwanted and targeted harassment and interactions like coordinated racial or gender-based harassment. In fact, platform moderators themselves use algorithms to identify and remove such toxic content. Requiring instead chronological feeds over curated ones risks exposing Connecticut's kids to greater harassment and cyberbullying. Committee, imagine, for example, a queer kid in your own district who spends a day at school, unfortunately being harassed. They come home, they log on to social media, and instead of seeing content that's been curated for their own interests and identity, they instead are served a chronological feed from their classmates of one after another posting harassing content about them. That is the reality of what would happen under HB 5474 and removing algorithms. Instead, we recommend a variety of policy solutions, including the most basic of addressing the issue at the root and increasing mental health programming and resources for Connecticut's youth in schools and homes. And digital literacy should, in my opinion, be treated as the most modern and next step of our K through 12 civics education. There are even existing resources and tools to help develop appropriate guides to effectively incorporate digital literacy and online safety into public education curriculum. And we certainly welcome the opportunity to work with the community on those opportunities. Lastly, I will just caution committee that the few states that have passed these kinds of laws have had them either struck down completely or are undergoing costly legal challenges, including just this week one announced in Maryland. With those considerations, Chamber of Progress urges you to oppose HB 5474 and support Connecticut's most vulnerable kids that use online spaces as a source of information, resource, community, and even lifelines. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Representative Mastro Francesco.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for coming in today for your testimony. I just have one question. Listen, I'm not a computer, I'm not that too knowledgeable when it comes to the programming of the computers, but how does the AI interfere with the algorithm going forward? That industry is very much evolving. Do you know what kind of an impact it would have on the algorithm, or does it have any at all?
That's an interesting question. I myself am not an expert on the workings of each individual platform. I will say that algorithms are technically considered AI. They capture your interests, what you've looked at, and therefore serve you other content that would be perceived to be of interest or of use to you. I would suspect that as AI gets stronger and we're able to use the tools for greater good and benefit, that it could only help with capturing, for example, harassing or toxic content online.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Representative Dauphiné.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is a technical one as well. When they when they implement this algorithm disruption, how do they just contain it from state to state? You were saying that Maryland has a lawsuit and others as well with regard to similar bills being passed, but how is it that we contain that from state to state?
That's an excellent question. And in fact, a lot of the states that, again, there are only a few that have passed laws like this, they've actually been stopped before the implementation stage for that very reason, among others, including First Amendment implications. But the issue really is the patchwork of regulations that bills like this create around the country. And it's difficult, for example, you could imagine a case in which someone lives in a state like Connecticut that has a law on the books like this. They travel to New York and now their platforms are completely different and operating differently. For the companies themselves, it creates a huge challenge when it comes to the administrative and even financial implications of having patchwork and really two completely different systems, one for youth, which would not allow algorithms, and one for adults that would. As you could imagine, that means that the companies that are better resourced and have the ability to eventually have those two sorts of programming and programming all over the country being different, they're able to continue operating, but smaller startup companies, for example, would not be able to simply for not having the resources.
Thank you for that. And I guess that made me ask another question with regard to we all get Wi-Fi services and we pay for those. And you said the financial ramifications to those providers would be huge. I'm wondering how that would be passed on to the consumer when we start to implement these sorts of things.
Sure. I was referring specifically to the social media platforms themselves. So you could imagine larger companies maybe being able to eventually work out a system that they could operate two separate platform styles, one chronological, one algorithmic, one in one state, but in the next state completely different because of the patchwork of laws across the country. Whereas the smaller startup businesses probably wouldn't even be able to launch in a state like Connecticut if you had this law on the books, because they wouldn't be able to have those two different feed options. In addition, it's extremely costly for the companies themselves to try to implement age verification. You're talking about uploading possibly pictures of IDs. You're talking about parental consent and getting personal data and information signed off on. And then, of course, there's a cybersecurity risk that I hinted at earlier, where this is all private information, personal data that is then at risk for the third-party age verifiers. That said, I don't see a way in which this sort of law would impact your internet providers themselves and then onto the consumer. It's more about the platforms being able to offer a service at all.
I see. Thank you so much. I think about the you mentioned the identification too, and the ability to fake your identification. I'm sure there will be some very creative ways in doing that. But thank you so much for your testimony.
Thank you for your questions.